September 7th, 2020. It's Monday evening in Shreveport, Louisiana, a city of nearly 200,000 known for its diverse outdoor recreation.
We have wonderful natural resources. If you're an outdoorsman, a hunter, or a fisherman, or a hiker.
A lot of people come as far away from places like Oklahoma just to experience the sportsman paradise.
But this paradise isn't perfect.
Hello, Shreveport Police.
Just before 7 p.m., Shreveport Police receive a 911 call from the city's Queensboro neighborhood.
It's an area that has, for decades, been the center of narcotics and crime.
What's that? Me and my boyfriend was in here sleeping, and all I know somebody came to the door and stabbed me to face.
The caller identifies herself as 30-year-old Bodesia Grant and says her boyfriend is 46-year-old Derek Taylor. But when asked for more information, she breaks down.
I can't understand the answer, okay? I need you to try to... What is this 15 minutes? She said I can deal with this family. Man, okay, man, I'm so sorry. I'm trying to understand it, but I can't. I know you understand. I do. I need the... Man.
That's when Bodesia hands the phone to a neighbor she'd run into in the parking lot.
The neighbor is able to give 911 the address of the apartment so they can send help.
But will they be able to get there in time?
The boyfriend that was stabbed, he okay?
I don't know. I haven't been up there. I might be bleeding out or something.
Derek Taylor had only been dating Bodesia Grant for the past 2 months.
They've been spending a lot of time together, just enjoying each other's company.
And that was exactly what Bodesia needed after she'd recently ended things with her long-term boyfriend, Courtney Taylor.
The two of them were in a relationship for about 5 years. He fathered 2 children with her.
But their budding family and their relationship had fallen apart.
They had their children taken away from them, which I believe it had something to do with them splitting up.
And once she met Derek, Bodesia began putting her life back together.
Courtney and Derek, they weren't related.
Derek was also older and more stable than Courtney had been.
I had actually known Derek Taylor. I had arrested him when I was younger in the department. Nothing crazy, just like traffic stuff, but it seemed like he had started to settle down.
And while Derek and Bodesia had only been together a couple months, it appeared that things were going well.
Derek had essentially moved in with her.
But now, Bodesia and Derek may never get to see where their relationship could go.
Miss Grant makes a 911 call, advises that her boyfriend is stabbed.
Bodesia was so distraught during the call that she had to hand her phone over to the neighbor, who told the police their location.
All right, I'm getting officers and the medical unit out that way.
When first responders enter the apartment moments later, they find Derek on the floor.
It was obvious of why she was upset. It was a bloody scene.
You can see the stab wound. It's in a bad location.
He has been stabbed in the arm and in the chest.
Working quickly, the first responders drag Derek into the living room to render first aid.
While it disturbed the crime scene, they needed room to work.
That's an obvious chest wound.
Yeah. Their deal is to stabilize, get him on a stretcher, get him to the hospital, and try to save his life.
As the ambulance rushes Derek to the hospital, the responding officer attempts to get a statement from Bodesia.
Oh, God! All right, I need you to tell me what happened, okay? I can't believe it!
She's obviously very emotional, but manages to sketch out the basics of what happened.
She said she had worked till 4 or 5 p.m. and returned home. Derek Taylor was already there. She was tired from work and went to lay down. He joined her in the bedroom.
I must have dozed off.
The next thing she knew, she woke to see Derek jumping out of bed.
He was struggling, stating he had been hit.
She described his wound as pumping blood like a fire hydrant.
Confused and afraid, she followed Derek as he stumbled out into the hallway.
He collapses on the floor.
And according to Bodicia, that's when she ran for help.
I knew I had to get him help as soon as possible.
Because of how upset and emotional Miss Grant was, she was placed in a patrol car, and officers were trying to settle her down.
But luckily for the police, someone else is able to talk.
Okay, so tell me what you saw.
The neighbor has crucial information for the investigation.
I think I saw the guy.
46-year-old Derek Taylor had embarked on a brand new relationship with Bodicia Grant.
But it had only been going on for a few months.
Bodicia had been on the rebound from her breakup with her ex, Courtney Taylor.
They had kids together, and prior to this particular incident, the kids were removed from them.
After meeting Derek, Bodicia had been slowly putting her life back together. But now it looks like tragedy has struck again.
Bodicia called 911 and reported that someone had come in and stabbed Derek.
Police officers and medical personnel from our fire department respond and find Derek Taylor laying in the hallway of the residence outside the bedroom.
EMTs waste little time getting Derek to the hospital.
They do their job well, and I've seen it happen to where you just don't think they're going to survive, and they survive.
All right, so tell me what happened, okay?
In the meantime, the responding officer tries to sort out what happened.
Although she's overcome with emotion, Bodicia is able to tell the police what little she knows.
I must have dozed off.
Miss Grant gave the account that they were sleeping in bed and she didn't know what happened.
She says she woke up to find Derek yelling and bleeding heavily from his chest.
Come over here with me.
It's not much to work with, but fortunately for the police, they have another eyewitness.
Their neighbor happened to be outside just working on his car.
So you're the neighbor?
And at a little before 7 p.m., he noticed someone coming out of Bodicia's building.
You think it's a suspect?
Had to be.
He was moving rapidly when he came back around the corner to get into his car. And that was one of the things that drew his attention to him.
He also said that the man was holding the front of his pants, like he had something stuffed in his waistband.
Had something in his pants. So I thought it was a little weird.
Then a few minutes later, Bodicia came out of the building hysterical.
When she started screaming that her boyfriend had been stabbed, the neighbor made the connection.
When the detectives arrive, they have Bodicia and the neighbor driven to the station for formal interviews.
We wanted to be able to speak to them away from the scene, away from any other chaos or distraction.
But first, they examine the crime scene.
You walk in the front door and you see this blood trail just being smeared across the floor.
The blood leads from the hallway into the apartment's living room.
Well, I was told the fire department had to move him into a bigger area.
And that is where the smear came in.
But it's clear that the bedroom was where the stabbing had occurred.
Blood is all over the side of the bed, to the wall, on the floor, along the baseboards, and on the door to the room.
That crime scene was brutal. That was a brutal stab wound.
The scene appears to fit what Bodicia told both the 911 dispatcher and the responding officer.
The blood spatter and transfer pattern suggests Derek was stabbed in the bed and staggered out of the room before collapsing in the hallway.
And there's no sign of the weapon used in the assault.
Which appears to fit what Bodicia's neighbor said about the subject having something hidden in his pants.
However, there are some things about the scene that have the detectives scratching their heads.
There was no damage to the apartment doorway.
It doesn't appear like there's a struggle.
And Bodicia's story about them being asleep seems a little suspicious.
It seems odd, 7 o'clock at night.
Who stabs somebody and you don't at least hear a struggle?
Your initial thoughts are, there's got to be more to this. The story doesn't make sense.
Unless it's a cover story.
You're thinking it's a domestic, that somehow Miss Grant is involved in what happened.
The nature of that attack, yeah, that was very personal, very up close, something that's very passionate.
Calling in on 911, it could be a ploy to misdirect you.
Although if that's the case, who was the man the neighbor saw fleeing the scene?
Either the neighbor is in on it somehow, or the detectives have misread the whole situation.
But before detectives can make their next move, they receive unfortunate news.
The victim had been declared deceased.
Now we're looking for a murder suspect.
Detectives investigating the mysterious stabbing that sent 46-year-old Derek Taylor to the hospital are now investigating a homicide.
The blade punctured one of his ventricles. It's a thing that pumps blood out of your heart.
On the scene, it was pretty much just an assault with a deadly weapon. But then, when this person has bled out, all of a sudden, this becomes a murder situation.
But who is the killer?
Given the nature of the crime, the detectives have yet to rule out a domestic incident or Derek's girlfriend, Bodicia Grant.
However, there's one complicating factor.
I think I saw the guy.
Bodicia's neighbor claims he saw someone fleeing the scene.
When the detectives return to the station and sit down with him for a formal statement, Bodicia's neighbor says he not only saw someone, he recognized them.
Yeah, I knew him. You knew him? Yeah, he was the old boyfriend.
They had been neighbors for 2 years.
So you saw his face?
Well, no.
Well, the man he saw was wearing a mask.
But you're sure it was him?
Yeah, for sure.
He had other distinguishing features. His hair, he had dreads.
If Bodicia's neighbor is telling the truth, it means the detective's first instinct was correct.
It's a domestic dispute after all.
There was the element of the love triangle.
All right, we appreciate you coming in today. That's all we need. You're free to go.
Hoping to learn more about her ex-boyfriend, the detectives turn to Bodicia.
By this point, she's had time to recover a little of her composure.
You hadn't been seeing Derek very long, had you?
Just 2 months.
And before that, you were dating somebody else?
Yeah, Courtney Taylor.
You're thinking Courtney Taylor and Derek Taylor. What is this relationship and this dynamic?
Are these brothers fighting over a woman or something?
But that's not the case.
Common names like Taylor, Smith, Williams, you're gonna have these families with the same name from the same area, but not related.
Okay, so you and Courtney broke up.
Yeah.
She said that their relationship had ended on a sour note, that they had kids and something happened and they lost their children.
Bodicia says that after the breakup, Courtney had moved on with a new girlfriend named Keandra Hines.
He's living with her in Mansfield now.
Mansfield is a small town. It's about roughly 30, 40 minutes outside of Shreveport.
However, despite his new relationship, it's possible Courtney had been angry that Boudicca was also seeing someone else.
Some people just can't let go of a relationship.
He may have been able to slip quietly into the apartment.
He did have a key at one time.
Hoping to confirm what Boudicca and her neighbor told them, the detectives returned to the scene of the crime.
In a situation where there's been a violent crime like this occur, canvassing the area is paramount because there could be security cameras, possible witnesses, and you start piecing different things together.
In this case, the detectives are in luck.
There are surveillance cameras everywhere.
And when the detectives return to the station to screen the footage from the complex's cameras, it proves crucial to the case.
It verified the accounts of the witnesses.
On the recording, a car pulls into the lot shortly before 7 p.m.
The footage was so good that you could see distinguishing factors about the vehicle.
You see the suspect exit the vehicle. There was still plenty of daylight out there for these cameras to pick up good quality video of this individual.
And while the suspect is wearing a mask, just as the neighbor said, it's easy to see why he didn't have much trouble recognizing him.
Physically, even without a mask, Courtney Taylor had very distinguishing physical features.
He has dreadlocks that were tied back.
He was very slender, and he was 6'2" or taller.
A second camera recorded him entering Boudicca's apartment.
So you see this possible suspect walk around the corner, walk up the stairs.
He did not pause hardly at all at the door. He just kind of turned the knob and went in.
Then, after a few brief moments, the man in the video is back outside.
19 seconds. That's how long it took him from whenever he went in and came out.
The assailant exits the apartment rapidly down the stairs, back around the corner of the building.
You can see while he's jogging concealment of something before entering his vehicle.
The detectives believe it's the murder weapon.
The footage from the parking lot also shows exactly what Boudicca's neighbor said he saw that evening.
He was approximately 20 yards away.
The video clearly shows him turn and look at the assailant and then follow his car as it leaves the parking lot.
It's a tremendous piece of evidence for the detectives.
Surveillance systems have become paramount in having an eyewitness that really speaks for itself. And the video in this particular case really helped. That's when those small pieces start coming together.
Without that, the case probably would have centered around the 911 caller, Miss Grant.
But now, coupled with Boudicca and the neighbors' accounts of what happened, the surveillance video is more than enough for detectives to secure a warrant for Courtney Taylor's arrest.
But in order to arrest him, they have to find him first.
The detectives start by looking up the registration for the car Courtney had been driving.
When I ran the registration for the vehicle, it showed an address in a parish south of here.
And the name on the registration is Courtney's new girlfriend, Keandra.
Detectives reach out to the sheriff's office in DeSoto Parish, who send a patrol car to her residence.
When we finally located the vehicle that we've been looking for,
It's parked right outside Keandra's house.
Car matches the description and license plate.
Sheriff's deputies in DeSoto Parish have just located the car believed to be driven by Courtney Taylor, the main person of interest in the murder of 46-year-old Derek Taylor.
We got a car with a matching description and license plate number.
Derek had been dating Courtney's ex, Boudicca Grant.
But the car was registered to Courtney's new girlfriend, Keandra.
And once they find out who that car belongs to, it's kind of like connecting the dots.
And now they found Keandra's car parked right outside her house.
He saw the vehicle sitting there and contacted the residents.
The woman who comes to the door tells the deputy that Courtney and Keandra aren't there.
Is that their car over there?
Mr. Taylor had been there with his new girlfriend the previous evening, but they had left in another vehicle.
It's actually quite irritating when you get so close just to realize you're still so far away. So now we're having to look for a completely different vehicle and start that whole process all over again.
After talking to Keandra's relative,
Thank you so much for your time, man.
No problem.
the DeSoto Parish deputy has her car towed to impound.
The vehicle was believed to have been used by the suspect to flee the location in Shreveport.
Let's go ahead and get a tow. Over.
Detective McAtee worked with investigators in that jurisdiction to obtain a search warrant for the vehicle once it had been impounded.
Warrant in hand, the Shreveport detectives search Keandra's car.
DNA swabs are taken from the passenger side of the front. Also, there was a spot on the headliner that we thought may have been blood or blood transfer.
It turned out it wasn't blood.
And that's not the only disappointment.
There was no weapons found in the vehicle.
They processed the vehicle and did not find any relevant information pertaining to this case.
Therefore, the vehicle was released.
Although when the detectives contact Keandra by phone to tell her she can pick up her car, she seems cautious.
She was very guarded, just stated that she didn't understand why her vehicle had been taken.
Well, it was part of a murder investigation.
Really?
She was told that Courtney Taylor was wanted for murder of Derek Taylor at that point.
You don't know where he is, do you?
No.
In fact, she stonewalled detectives completely.
She wouldn't tell us where she was so that she could be interviewed.
If you do see Courtney, let him know we'd like to talk to him.
She now had my phone number. He could reach out and call me or come in for an interview.
Not that detectives have much hope of that happening.
I 100% felt that she was more worried about Mr. Courtney Taylor than the victim. And that was attacked and stabbed while asleep.
With Courtney apparently in the wind, detectives are even more certain he's their man.
It's like detectives always say, when you're guilty, the first thing you do is run.
And the fact that he is still at large is more than a little unsettling for Boudicca.
Living through what she just lived through, I can understand some amount of fear in her knowing that Courtney Taylor was still out there.
It is almost inconceivable what it must have been like to wake up to your partner gasping for breath, bleeding, trying to cling to life, the confusion, the trauma of witnessing the person that you went to bed next to happy, dying before your eyes.
I'm sure this entire time she was sitting on pins and needles wondering if Courtney was coming for her.
However, despite spending the next several months trying to locate Courtney, he manages to elude capture. Until, in early December, a tip comes in from Shreveport Crime Stoppers.
This tip identified an exact location where Courtney Taylor is supposed to be staying with his new girlfriend.
But is it too good to be true?
After we received the Crime Stoppers tip, I drive by and observe the sedan that I have previously impounded and released.
It's the same car that Courtney had been driving in the surveillance video.
With the tip looking credible, the Shreveport police call in the U.S. Marshals.
They're going to try to execute the arrest warrant for Courtney Taylor at this residence.
U.S. Marshals, open up!
A woman answers the door, but it's not Keandra.
Looking for a Courtney Taylor.
Who? I don't know any Courtney Taylor.
But immediately after that, the woman nods her head towards the back of the house.
She was alerting them with her body that he was in fact there.
She just doesn't want Courtney to hear her.
After moving the woman to safety, the SWAT team storms inside.
Clear.
Clearing the house, there's no sign of the suspect.
Clear.
Until they come to a closed bedroom door.
U.S. Marshals, come out now!
As the officers are about to step into the room, shots are fired from the other side of that door.
U.S. Marshals believe they've finally cornered murder suspect Courtney Taylor.
A Crime Stoppers tip led law enforcement to his hideout.
U.S. Marshals, come out now!
But just as they're closing in, the situation escalates.
Shots are fired from the other side of that bedroom door.
The police and marshals duck for cover.
Fortunately, no one was struck by the rounds that came through the door.
But in the confusion, Courtney climbs out a window and escapes through the backyard.
As normal procedure, they had positioned some officers in the back of the house. But when those shots rang out, those officers came forward to assist and make sure there wasn't anybody injured. Well, that allowed the suspect to escape.
He fired the rounds so he could get out of the house. He shot through the door to slow us down.
But his desperate move only makes the police more determined to find him.
The fact that this guy's willing to shoot at a law enforcement officer, it amps it up. We got to get this guy. It's all hands on deck.
And for at least some of the detectives searching for him, finding Courtney had become personal.
One of my best friends on earth was shot at because I sent him there. Oh, that was a rough couple hours.
You know, law enforcement is a group of people that are loyal, that are going to go the distance for you.
Although for the moment, all detectives can do is search the house where Courtney had been hiding out.
They recovered the shell casings from inside the room where the suspect was, and they recovered the projectiles from the other room where the bullets passed through the door.
While the search for Courtney continues, the news of his harrowing escape puts the community on high alert.
There's somebody still actively out there that's willing to shoot a police and willing to shoot someone else to get away.
How can anyone feel safe?
But with Courtney's picture now all over the news, it isn't long before another lead comes in to the Crime Stoppers tip line.
Supposedly, Courtney is in an apartment across the river from Shreveport in Bossier City, Louisiana.
And when police arrive, there's no shootout with Courtney this time.
They were able to take him into custody without incident.
Keandra was with him and is also taken into custody.
She knew why he's being searched and looked for, and still saying, all right, I'm gonna help hide you. And at that point, she is just as much part of the problem as Mr. Taylor was.
Courtney's arrest is welcome news for Boadicea and all of Shreveport.
That had to be a relief for everyone. This guy committed a murder, and this guy needs to be in prison.
And in this case, the community needs to be thanked because I don't know who those Crime Stopper tips were from. But whoever they were from knew enough and provided information that did result in somebody wanted for a brutal murder taken off the street.
Once in custody, Courtney refuses to talk.
Courtney stated that he was not going to speak to me, had nothing to say to me, and had no idea why he was under arrest for murder.
However, now facing accessory charges, Keandra is suddenly more cooperative. Although according to her, she'd had no choice.
She's claiming that she's afraid because he told me he would kill me.
I don't know if she was standing by her man or if she was afraid of her man. It could have been both.
We found the car in Mansfield, we impounded it. The car's then released, and then the car is found again in Shreveport where he is staying with her. And so after that, he evades the police. Then he's captured in Bossier, and she's with him again. I don't think that there was any control over her. She wanted to be there. She went along for this ride like Bonnie and Clyde.
However, there is one person that Courtney is trying to control, even from behind bars.
In May of 2021, Boudicca gets a phone call from Courtney, who is in jail awaiting trial.
In our local jails, inmates are allowed to make phone calls. All of those phone calls are recorded.
And from the recordings, it's clear that he's trying to sway her testimony.
You can't make people say that you don't know. I promise you that.
After evading authorities for 3 months, murder suspect Courtney Taylor is finally in custody.
The crime occurred early September, and he was arrested early December.
He was booked into Bossier Parish Jail, extradited back to Shreveport.
And prosecutors have an abundance of evidence against him.
The main items were the surveillance video and that eyewitness in the parking lot. And then Mr. Taylor's actions when police did corner him and he shot it out with them and made a second escape. That showed his guilty conscience.
Still, the district attorney believes Courtney's ex-girlfriend, Boudicca Grant, will be essential.
She made the case. She was 75% of the evidence.
And it was obvious the prosecutors weren't the only ones who thought so.
On May 6, 2021, Courtney calls Boudicca from jail.
The call starts off on a seemingly friendly note.
I miss you.
Defendants do make these phone calls. They remind them of the good times, of the love that they shared, of the children that they shared. And all of this is trying to prevent witnesses from testifying.
I ain't did nothing. You heard me?
He was attempting to direct Miss Grant to testify that she didn't know what happened.
But in the process, Courtney ends up implicating himself.
What happened? You was asleep.
How would he have known she was asleep if he had not been in the room?
When you're guilty, you do dumb things.
There's an automated thing on the line that says this call will be recorded. But for whatever reason, unbeknownst to me, criminals will spill the beans over the phone. And it's not uncommon where they're not directly saying they had involvement, but they're saying enough.
You heard what I said? You don't know you was asleep. You don't know what the hell going on. You hear me?
Despite the pressure, Boudicca refuses to budge.
You know, they subpoenaed me.
She needed the cover of our subpoena. That's a man she had had a 5-year relationship with, the father of her children. To say that she no longer had feelings for him would be silly, right? But that court order emotionally helped her parse her role in this.
But as Courtney continues to push, Boudicca loses her patience.
You should never came there and mess with that man. I'm not gonna lie. Okay.
She was very forthright on the phone call. She basically told him she was going to show up and tell the truth. When
Courtney goes on trial in May of 2023, The prosecutors opened their case by describing Derek's murder as an act of domestic violence.
A lot of people, when they hear domestic, they're used to hearing a male-on-female interaction, but that's not always the case. This is still a very domestic case in the sense of an ex-boyfriend stabbed and killed the new boyfriend.
Domestic violence, it's about control. They're going to go back and try to gain control one way or the other. And usually, they're going to gain that control through violence.
According to the prosecutor, that's exactly what Courtney was doing when he went to Bodicia's apartment on the evening of September 7th, 2020.
We can assume that he might have had bad intentions. Whether or not he knew he would find Derek Taylor there, I don't know. It might have just been a situation, as we say, wrong place, wrong time.
Regardless of whether he knew Derek was there or was surprised to find him in bed with Bodicia, Courtney struck silently and swiftly.
A knife doesn't make any noise, so if, in fact, the assailant had just stabbed and then immediately left, I don't doubt her statement that she didn't see the assailant as he left. He was familiar with the apartment. He could have moved silently, and he could have left quickly. And in fact, we see that on the surveillance video.
And while Courtney made his way back to his car, there was chaos inside Bodicia's apartment.
Waking up to getting stabbed, not knowing what's going on, I couldn't begin to imagine what Derek Taylor was thinking in those moments.
Baby, what's wrong? Hold on, wait.
It's unspeakable. I don't know how anybody could think to do that to someone.
When it's time for Bodicia's testimony, she doesn't back down.
When she testified, it was tense, but she did a good job. She testified truthfully. She spoke clearly. A lot of times people will just disappear and they'll talk so softly that the jury can't hear them. But she spoke out.
However, there was one thing she couldn't say.
She couldn't positively say that she saw Courtney stab Derek.
I don't think she was trying to avoid any responsibility. I think she probably did not actually see him.
When it's the defense's turn, Courtney's attorneys leap at the opening.
Counsel for the defense argued that there wasn't a quote-unquote witness to this event.
But when the jury reaches its verdict, it's clear that the prosecutors had made their case.
The jury found him guilty of second-degree murder.
Courtney's sentenced to life without parole.
This guy will spend the rest of his life in jail. You won't hurt anybody else. You won't have any more victims.
That does bring some sense of relief for the family and loved ones of Derek Taylor.
For her role, Keandra is convicted of accessory after the fact, but faces a much lighter punishment.
She was sentenced to just 2 years of supervised probation.
But even if Courtney is where he belongs, it can't make up for all he took from Derek's loved ones.
Here was a man whose life was snatched away from him for no reason other than he happened to fall in love with a woman who'd once been in a relationship with a madman.
And Derek probably never saw it coming.
From our investigation, Derek Taylor had no understanding that somebody out there wanted him dead.
The Hawaiian archipelago sits suspended in the vast, indifferent expanse of the Pacific Ocean, acting as a beacon for those seeking refuge from the relentless pace of the mainland. Among these islands, the Big Island of Hawaii holds a distinct, almost primal presence. It is a land of profound contrasts, where molten earth bleeds into the frigid depths of the sea, and where dense, impenetrable rainforests give way to stark, sun-baked fields of volcanic rock. In the early 1970s, this geographical isolation fostered a unique psychological sanctuary. For the youth of that era, the island was not merely a destination, it was a profound promise of a different way of living. It offered a return to simplicity, an escape from the mounting cynicisms of the modern world, and a chance to exist in harmony with a landscape that demanded nothing but respect. The air carried the heavy scent of salt and blooming flora, masking the anxieties of a generation desperate to redefine their existence. To arrive on the Big Island in 1973 was to step off the edge of the known world and into a deeply localized rhythm, where time was measured not by the ticking of a clock, but by the shifting of the tides and the long, slow arcs of the sun across the expansive horizon. The western coast of the Big Island, particularly the regions stretching around Kealakekua, epitomized this tranquil ideal. Here, the waters of the Pacific are a startling, crystalline blue, hiding vibrant coral reefs beneath their calm surface. The coastline is jagged, shaped by ancient lava flows that have long since cooled into dark, unforgiving stone, yet it possesses a quiet, magnetic beauty. The communities scattered along this coast were tight-knit and fiercely protective of their peaceful existence. Doors were routinely left unlocked, and a deeply ingrained culture of mutual trust dictated daily interactions. It was an era before the pervasive hum of digital connectivity, a time when human connection required physical presence, and isolation was a chosen state rather than an imposed one. In this environment, a profound sense of safety enveloped the residents and the transient souls who drifted through. It was an unspoken covenant that in a place of such overwhelming natural majesty, human cruelty had no place to take root. The sheer beauty of the land seemed to act as a barrier against the darker impulses of the human psyche, creating an illusion of invulnerability that was as comforting as it was fragile. Within this cultural landscape, a specific mode of existence thrived, one defined by fluidity and an absolute reliance on the goodwill of strangers. For the young people gravitating toward the coastal lifestyle, owning a vehicle was often an unnecessary burden, both financially and philosophically. Mobility was achieved through the simple act of standing by the roadside, extending a thumb, and waiting for the inevitable kindness of a passing driver. Hitchhiking was not viewed through the modern lens of inherent danger or reckless behavior. It was an integral thread in the social fabric of the island. It functioned as an informal transit system, built entirely on communal trust and the shared understanding that everyone was navigating the same winding, coastal roads. To accept a ride was to participate in a fleeting microcommunity, a brief intersection of lives before parting ways. This culture of absolute trust normalized a vulnerability that, in retrospect, is deeply unsettling. It meant placing one's physical safety entirely in the hands of whoever happened to pull over, operating on the fundamental belief that the person behind the wheel harbored no ill intent. It was a beautiful, naive consensus that defined a generation, yet it also created an environment where the boundaries between safety and peril could be erased in a single, quiet moment. It is against this backdrop of profound trust and blinding natural beauty that the reality of a brutal, unsolved homicide becomes exceptionally jarring. When violence erupts in a landscape so universally associated with peace, the contrast is intellectually and emotionally staggering. It shatters the collective illusion of sanctuary, leaving behind a lingering, toxic residue of suspicion and fear. A murder in paradise is not just a crime against an individual, it is a profound violation of the environment itself. The dark, porous volcanic rocks and the dense foliage transform from elements of beauty into potential accomplices, silent witnesses that harbor secrets they will never yield. The ocean, once a source of endless joy and sustenance, suddenly seems capable of washing away the most horrific of sins. This jarring juxtaposition is the foundation of a mystery that has haunted the western coast of the Big Island for more than half a century. It is a narrative of a life violently interrupted, of a community irrevocably altered, and of a search for truth that has been relentlessly thwarted by the quiet, eroding passage of time. The passage of time is the most relentless adversary in any pursuit of justice. When a violent act occurs, there is an immediate, frantic scramble to capture the scattered fragments of truth before they dissipate. The air is thick with urgency. But as days turn into weeks, and weeks bleed into decades, the nature of the investigation fundamentally transforms. The physical evidence, no matter how carefully preserved, begins to lose its context. The landscapes alter, roads are paved over, and the very ground where a tragedy occurred eventually surrenders to the encroaching wilderness. More devastatingly, human memory begins its slow, inevitable process of decay. Details blur, certainties become doubts, and the witnesses who once held the key to the narrative inevitably move away or pass on. What was once a vibrant, urgent reality is slowly flattened into the sterile, two-dimensional confines of a police file. The victim, once a living, breathing person with complex hopes, fears, and a tangible presence in the world, is tragically reduced to a collection of crime scene photographs, yellowing autopsy reports, and a sequence of unanswered questions. They become a ghost trapped within the bureaucratic machinery of the justice system, waiting for an advocate who can piece together the fading echoes of their final moments. In the archives of the Hawaii Police Department, there exists a specific category dedicated to these fading echoes, the Unsolved Homicides Unit. These are the files that refuse to be closed, the cases that defy resolution and linger as open wounds within the institutional memory of the police force. Among the most enduring and haunting of these cold cases is that of a young woman whose life was extinguished in the spring of 1973. Her story is a stark reminder of the vulnerability inherent in the human condition, a chilling narrative of a journey toward light that was met with an impenetrable darkness. She was not a native of the islands, but like so many others, she had been drawn across the ocean by the magnetic pull of a simpler, more authentic existence. She sought a life defined by the rhythm of the waves and the warmth of the tropical sun, only to find herself the victim of a senseless, brutal act that would permanently embed her name in the darkest chapters of the island's history. Her name was Gail Hook. She was 21 years old, standing on the threshold of adulthood, with a future that was entirely unwritten. Originating from the damp, overcast environment of Seattle, Washington, she had sought out the radiant heat and the expansive horizons of the Hawaiian Islands. To reduce her to the status of a cold case victim is a profound disservice to the life she actually lived. Before she became a symbol of unsolved violence, she was a person characterized by an intense vitality. Those who crossed her path remembered a young woman who was remarkably open, possessing a genuine warmth that drew people toward her. She moved through the world with a free-spirited grace, untethered by the rigid expectations of the society she had left behind. Her connection to the natural world, and particularly to the ocean, was not merely a hobby, it was a fundamental aspect of her identity. She spent countless hours on the beaches of Kealakekua, finding solace and joy in the relentless motion of the surf and the vast, unbroken expanse of the sky. Gail Hook was a product of her environment, fully embracing the communal, trusting lifestyle that characterized the island youth of the early 70s. She did not drive, relying entirely on the established, culturally accepted practice of hitchhiking to navigate the winding coastal roads. For months, this system functioned flawlessly, carrying her safely from her home to the beaches she so deeply loved and back again. She moved with the assumption of safety, enveloped in the collective goodwill of the community. There was no reason for her to suspect that this method of travel, this vital artery of her daily existence, would eventually lead her into a fatal encounter. Her reliance on the kindness of strangers was a testament to her optimistic worldview, a worldview that was catastrophically betrayed on a quiet spring day. The transition from a vibrant life to a silent tragedy is often abrupt, leaving behind a confusing void that demands explanation. In the case of Gail Hook, the narrative fractures completely in late March of 1973. Her disappearance did not immediately trigger alarms. The relaxed, transient nature of her lifestyle provided a plausible cover for her absence. It was a tragic misunderstanding born of the very freedom she cherished, a delay that allowed the physical evidence to degrade and the perpetrator to slip away into the anonymity of the island. By the time the grim reality of her fate was uncovered in a remote, overgrown area near an old church in Pupu, the trail had already grown hopelessly cold. The discovery of her remains shifted the narrative from a missing person inquiry to a frantic, complex homicide investigation, one that would quickly encounter insurmountable obstacles. This is the anatomy of a cold case. It is a meticulous examination of a void, a desperate attempt to extract truth from a silence that has persisted for over half a century. The investigation into the murder of Gail Hook represents one of the longest-running mysteries in the jurisdiction of the Hawaii Police Department. It is a story characterized by devastating dead ends, technological limitations, and a frustrating lack of direct evidence. Yet, despite the formidable passage of time, the case remains officially open, a testament to the enduring obligation to seek justice for a life violently stolen. To understand the tragedy of Gail Hook, one must step back into the world she inhabited, reconstructing the atmosphere of 1973, mapping the geography of the Kealakekua coast, and tracing the final, fatal steps of a young woman who simply wanted to spend her day by the sea. It requires looking past the yellowed pages of the police file and attempting to grasp the terrifying reality of her final moments in a desperate bid to answer the questions that have haunted the Big Island for 53 years. The endeavor to revisit such an ancient tragedy is not merely an academic exercise in historical true crime, it is an act of solemn remembrance. Every time a cold case file is opened, every time the details of a forgotten life are spoken aloud, the victim is momentarily pulled back from the abyss of obscurity. We delve into the shadows of 1973 not just to analyze the mechanics of a murder, but to honor the humanity of the person who was lost. The narrative of Gail Hook forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that monsters can exist in the most breathtaking of paradises, moving undetected among the seemingly innocent. As we peel back the layers of this enduring mystery, we must navigate the complex intersection of a trusting counterculture, a geographically isolating landscape, and the chilling silence of a killer who has managed to evade the reach of the law for decades. The story begins not with violence, but with a young woman's simple desire to find peace on a sun-drenched shoreline, a deeply relatable human pursuit that makes the ensuing darkness all the more difficult to comprehend. To truly comprehend the profound tragedy that befell Gail Hook, it is an absolute necessity to look beyond the clinical, detached language of a police report and attempt to understand the vibrant, living human being she was before her identity became irrevocably tethered to a cold case file. Gail did not simply materialize out of the ether onto the sun-baked shores of the Big Island. She arrived carrying the distinct cultural and environmental imprints of her hometown. She was a daughter of the Pacific Northwest, born and raised in the bustling, often overcast environs of Seattle, Washington. For a young woman coming of age in the early 1970s, a period defined by massive social upheaval and a collective yearning for new, unburdened ways of living, the heavy, gray skies of Washington state might have felt remarkably suffocating. The transition from the damp, structured environment of Seattle to the wild, unrestrained, and eternally sunny expanse of the Hawaiian archipelago was not merely a change of address, it was a profound geographic and psychological emancipation. It represented a deliberate, conscious choice to pursue a life dictated not by societal expectations, but by the elemental rhythms of nature. Approximately 9 months before her life was violently extinguished, Gail made the monumental decision to leave the familiar comforts of the mainland behind. At 21 years old, she was situated precisely at that terrifying and exhilarating precipice between adolescence and true adulthood, a period where the desire for autonomy frequently overrides the fear of the unknown. She did not undertake this daunting migration alone. Accompanied by a close friend, she boarded a flight that carried her thousands of miles across the deep blue expanse of the Pacific Ocean, chasing a vision of paradise that had captured the imagination of an entire generation. Their arrival in Hawaii was driven by a powerful, singular objective: to immerse themselves entirely in the island lifestyle, to shed the heavy, cumbersome layers of their mainland existence, and to embrace a simpler, more authentic mode of being. For Gail and her companion, the Big Island was the ultimate manifestation of this dream, a place where the air was perpetually warm, the horizons were infinite, and the societal rigidities of the mainland seemed to dissolve upon contact with the salty ocean breeze. Upon arriving on the Big Island, Gail and her friend gravitated toward the western coast, eventually laying down roots in the deeply atmospheric area of Kealakekua. This specific region was, and remains, a place of extraordinary, almost aggressive natural beauty. It is an environment where the lush, vibrant green of tropical vegetation constantly attempts to reclaim the dark, porous scars of ancient lava flows, creating a landscape that feels incredibly alive and ancient. Here, they established a modest living arrangement, joining a loose, informal network of like-minded individuals who share their deep appreciation for the ocean and the unhurried pace of island life. She did not merely survive in this new environment. She seemingly thrived, quickly adapting to the unique cadences of the community and forging solid connections with the people she encountered in her daily routines. This deep connection to the land would unfortunately become the very backdrop for her untimely demise. The portrait that emerges from the recollections of those who knew Gail during her tragically brief time on the island is one of an incredibly warm, deeply engaging individual. Friends and acquaintances consistently described her using adjectives that paint a picture of a vibrant, outward-looking soul. She was universally characterized as being extraordinarily open and friendly, possessing a natural, unforced charisma that made it remarkably easy for her to connect with people from all walks of life. It allowed her to navigate the social landscape of the Big Island with ease, cultivating a wide circle of friends and casual acquaintances. This was not a young woman who was hiding from the world. This was a young woman who was desperately trying to engage with it on her own terms. The friends she made in Hawaii described her as possessing a fiercely free-spirited personality, a trait that was entirely congruent with the prevailing cultural ethos of the early 70s. She rejected rigid structures and arbitrary rules, preferring to let her intuition and her deep-seated love for the natural world guide her daily decisions. At the very core of Gail's identity, and the primary driving force behind her relocation to the Big Island, was a profound, almost spiritual connection to the natural world, specifically the ocean. For Gail, the beach was not simply a recreational destination, it was a sanctuary, a place of meditation, and the central axis around which her new life revolved. The ocean, with its raw power and endless rhythms, seemed to provide her with a sense of peace and belonging that she perhaps had not found in the gray drizzle of the Pacific Northwest. She was entirely captivated by this vibrant marine environment. This deep, abiding love for the sea heavily influenced her daily routines and dictated her movements around the Kealakekua area. When she left her residence, it was almost always with the intention of heading toward the water. It was this exact, innocent pursuit of nature's beauty that would ultimately place her in the path of unimaginable danger, transforming her sanctuary into the setting of a dark, enduring mystery. To fully understand the circumstances that led to Gail's disappearance, one must carefully examine the practical, logistical realities of her existence in Kealakekua. A critical detail that fundamentally shaped her daily life and ultimately played a crucial role in the tragic sequence of events was the simple fact that Gail Hook did not own an automobile. In the context of 1973 Hawaii, among the young, countercultural demographic to which Gail belonged, it was a perfectly ordinary, even preferred, state of affairs. Furthermore, a vehicle represented a tether, a mechanical burden that contradicted the very essence of the free-spirited, unencumbered lifestyle they had crossed an ocean to achieve. Consequently, Gail, like countless other young men and women living along the coast, relied on an alternative, highly informal method of transportation to move between her residence, the local shops, and the various beaches she frequented. Without a car, Gail's primary mode of transit was hitchhiking. This is perhaps the most vital piece of contextual information necessary for understanding the mechanics of this case, and it is a detail that requires a significant suspension of modern biases to truly grasp. Today, hitchhiking is widely viewed through a lens of extreme caution, often heavily stigmatized and associated with inherent, reckless danger. However, the sociological landscape of the Big Island in 1973 was fundamentally different. Hitchhiking was not a fringe activity relegated to the desperate or the careless. It was a universally accepted, highly normalized, and heavily utilized form of community transit. It was simply how young people got around. The coastal roads of Kealakekua were dotted with individuals standing on the shoulder, extending a thumb, entirely confident that a neighbor, a friend, or a benevolent stranger would eventually pull over. It was an exercise in radical trust, built upon a deeply ingrained cultural assumption that the island was an absolute safe haven. Drivers picked up hitchhikers not out of a sense of obligation, but as a casual courtesy, an unspoken agreement to help one another navigate the sprawling geography of their shared paradise. It is of paramount importance to emphasize this cultural context to aggressively counter any instinct to cast blame upon the victim. When examining a cold case from a bygone era, it is dangerously easy to apply contemporary standards of safety and risk assessment to the actions of the deceased. She was not engaging in a high-risk behavior. She was simply participating in the established, socially sanctioned norms of her community. Her reliance on hitchhiking was a reflection of her trust in the people of the Big Island, a trust that was entirely reasonable given the prevailing atmosphere of peace and mutual reliance that characterized the time. She stepped onto the shoulder of the road not with a sense of trepidation, but with the practical goal of reaching the ocean she loved. She was a vibrant, nature-loving 21-year-old woman utilizing the only transportation system available to her. The tragedy of Gail Hook is not that she made a reckless choice, but that her entirely rational, culturally appropriate trust was violently exploited by an unknown predator who weaponized the very innocence of the island against her. Understanding this reality is the only way to truly comprehend the profound sense of betrayal that this murder inflicted upon the community, and it is the necessary lens through which we must examine the dark, final chapter of Gail's journey. The 29th of March, 1973, began like countless other days on the western coast of the Big Island, offering no meteorological or atmospheric hints of the profound tragedy that was about to unfold. For Gail Hook, the morning was characterized by the comfortable, unhurried routine that defined her new life in Kealakekua, a routine centered almost entirely around her deep connection to the natural environment. She prepared for the day with a specific destination in mind, gathering her modest belongings and communicating to her roommates her intention to head down to the shoreline to enjoy the ocean. There was absolutely nothing remarkable about this departure. It was a scene that had played out numerous times before in their shared household, a casual exit that carried no weight of finality. She stepped out into the warm Hawaiian air, leaving behind the safety of her residence and walking toward the road to engage in the customary practice of hitchhiking, fully expecting to return before the day had entirely slipped away. As she stood on the shoulder of the road, waiting for a vehicle to stop and offer a ride, she was simply a young woman anticipating a peaceful afternoon by the water, entirely unaware that this mundane act of seeking transportation would mark the final, irreversible juncture of her life. The mundane nature of her departure is perhaps the most chilling aspect of the narrative, highlighting the terrifying reality that the darkest moments of human existence are often preceded by the most ordinary of actions. She would have extended her thumb to passing motorists, relying on the unspoken social contract that promised safe passage to those who asked. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the volcanic landscape, Gail vanished into the steady stream of coastal traffic, effectively disappearing from the known world. When evening descended and she failed to return to the residence in Kealakekua, the immediate reaction of her roommates was not one of panic or even mild concern. A reaction that seems deeply counterintuitive in retrospect, but was entirely logical within the specific context of their shared lifestyle. The lack of immediate alarm can be traced back to a casual conversation that had taken place prior to her departure, a fleeting exchange of words that would inadvertently alter the entire trajectory of the ensuing investigation. Gail had previously expressed a strong, distinct interest in taking a trip to Waipio Valley, a remarkably remote and breathtakingly beautiful location situated on the northern coast of the island. Waipio Valley, with its steep cliffs and lush, secluded floor, was a popular destination for those seeking a deeper, more isolated connection with nature, and a journey there typically required an extended commitment of time, often involving overnight stays and unpredictable travel arrangements. Because she had actively discussed the possibility of visiting this specific valley, her roommates organically assumed that her failure to return that evening was simply the result of a spontaneous change in plans. They rationalized her absence by concluding that she had likely secured a ride heading north and had decided to embark on the Waipio Valley adventure on a whim, a decision that was perfectly aligned with her adventurous, free-spirited personality. This assumption, born of logic and a deep understanding of her character, created a protective psychological buffer, preventing them from entertaining the terrifying possibility that she had met with foul play. In their minds, Gail was not missing. She was simply exploring, immersed in the magnificent isolation of the valley, disconnected from the outside world by choice rather than by force. This tragic misunderstanding, while completely innocent and understandable in the moment, had catastrophic consequences for the preservation of evidence and the momentum of the search. Days began to slip past, the calendar turning from March into April, with her roommates maintaining their patient expectation of her eventual return, carrying on with their daily routines, completely unaware that while they imagined her hiking through lush northern forests, she was actually lying lifeless in a deeply hidden, desolate area much closer to home. The critical window of time immediately following a disappearance, the period during which witnesses might still retain fresh memories and physical evidence remain somewhat intact against the elements, was quietly and completely lost to the wind. By the time the assumption of a spontaneous trip began to erode and genuine worry started to take root in the Kealakekua household, the trail had already grown hopelessly cold, the vibrant, living girl they knew having been reduced to a secret kept by the unforgiving landscape. The narrative remained suspended until the 6th of April, 1973, when the agonizing silence was shattered by a gruesome discovery far removed from the idyllic beaches she had intended to visit. On that day, a group of local high school students had ventured into the rugged, overgrown terrain surrounding the Kahikolu Trinity Church, a historic and somewhat isolated structure located in the area of Napoopoo, situated south of Kealakekua Bay. The teenagers were simply exploring the area, navigating the dense vegetation and the uneven volcanic ground that characterized the landscape around the old stone church. Their innocent exploration came to an abrupt, horrifying halt when they stumbled upon something utterly incongruous with the quiet solemnity of the environment. Hidden among the encroaching foliage, shielded from immediate view by the thick tropical undergrowth, they discovered the decomposing remains of a human body, a sight that would permanently scar their young minds and instantly transform the quiet historical site into an active, complex crime scene. The sheer shock of the discovery prompted an immediate and frantic retreat from the area, followed by a rapid notification of the local authorities, who descended upon Napoopoo with a grim sense of urgency. The arrival of the police shattered the peaceful atmosphere of the church grounds, replacing the sounds of wind and birds with the crackle of radios and the methodical, heavy footsteps of investigators trying to secure the perimeter. It was quickly evident to the first responding officers that this was not a natural death or a tragic hiking accident, as the scene bore the unmistakable, chilling hallmarks of a deliberate homicide. The remains were subjected to a preliminary examination, and despite the severe degradation caused by exposure to the elements over a prolonged period, the identity of the victim was tragically confirmed. The body found near the Kahikolu Trinity Church was that of Gail Hook, the vibrant 21-year-old woman who had set out for the beach more than a week prior, her journey having ended in unimaginable violence. The confirmation of her identity sent shockwaves through the community, vaporizing the theory of the Waipio Valley excursion and replacing it with reality. The medical examiner arrived to analyze the remains and piece together the final, brutal moments of her life, a task made exponentially more difficult by the merciless effects of the tropical climate. The conclusion drawn from this grim assessment was definitive and devastating, establishing that Gail had been deceased for approximately 1 week prior to the gruesome discovery by the students. This timeline perfectly aligned with the day she vanished, confirming the agonizing truth that she had likely been murdered on the very day she left her home, while her friends spent the subsequent week believing she was safely exploring the northern coast. The cause of death was officially determined to be a fatal gunshot wound, a violent, deliberate act that erased any lingering possibility of an accidental demise and firmly categorized the case as a brutal, cold-blooded murder. This dark realization that she had been shot to death in such a remote, desolate location raised a multitude of deeply unsettling questions about the sequence of events that brought her from the sunlit shoulder of a coastal highway to the shadowed, overgrown grounds of the Napoopoo Church. She did not drive, meaning someone had deliberately transported her to this secluded spot, either through deception or by force, turning the vehicle she had trusted into a mobile trap. The transition from the public sphere of a hitchhiking route to the isolated, hidden environment of the crime scene indicated a calculated effort by the perpetrator to conceal the atrocity and delay discovery for as long as possible. The agonizing 1-week delay between the murder and the location of the body served exactly the purpose the killer had likely intended, allowing the unforgiving Hawaiian weather to wreak havoc on the crime scene. The relentless sun, the frequent bursts of rain, and the natural biological processes of the jungle environment worked in tandem to degrade, destroy, or completely wash away crucial physical evidence that might have pointed toward the identity of the shooter. The tragedy of the discovery was thus compounded by the immediate realization of the monumental investigative hurdles ahead, as the authorities were forced to start their inquiry from a position of severe disadvantage. The young woman who had crossed an ocean seeking peace and a deep connection with nature had instead found a brutal, lonely end, her final moments stolen by a faceless entity who left her to be consumed by the very landscape she had so deeply admired. The incident at Napoopoo marked the definitive, heartbreaking conclusion of Gail Hook's physical journey, but it also signaled the chaotic, frustrating beginning of a search for justice that would stretch across decades. A search forever hindered by the fatal week of silence that followed her last known footsteps into the sunlit abyss of a Hawaiian morning. When the initial shock of the discovery subsided, the grim reality of the investigative hurdle immediately set in for the detectives of the Hawaii Police Department as they stood upon the overgrown grounds of the Kahikolu Trinity Church. Securing a crime scene is typically a process defined by meticulous preservation, a frantic effort to freeze a specific moment in time before the contamination of the outside world can erase the fragile physical narratives left behind by both victim and perpetrator. However, in the case of Gail Hook, the concept of a pristine crime scene was an absolute impossibility, completely obliterated by the tragic, week-long delay between the murder and the discovery of her remains. The isolated, historical location in Napoopoo, while providing the killer with the necessary seclusion to commit the atrocity, also exposed the scene to the full, merciless brunt of the Hawaiian climate. For 7 days and 7 nights, the dense tropical environment had relentlessly assaulted the area, with fluctuating temperatures, sudden coastal rains, and the aggressive biology of the jungle systematically dismantling the physical evidence. The earth, which might have cleanly held the precise impressions of a struggle or the distinct tread of a killer boots, had been subjected to the elements, blurring the lines of the narrative. Detectives were forced to operate in a compromised space, sifting through an environment that had essentially digested the immediate aftermath of the crime, leaving them to hunt for microscopic anomalies in a vast, overgrown landscape. The preliminary examination of the scene and the subsequent forensic analysis of the remains yielded a horrifyingly clear cause of death, confirming that Gail Hook had been the victim of a deliberate and brutal execution. The medical examiner determined beyond a shadow of a doubt that the fatal injury was a gunshot wound, a violent punctuation mark that abruptly ended her life and transformed the surrounding foliage into a silent witness to a murder. The specifics of this fatal wound have been the subject of slight narrative variations in the decades following the crime, highlighting the complexities of maintaining a cohesive cold case file over half a century. A specific bulletin released by the police department in 2013 on the 40th anniversary of the murder explicitly stated that the young woman had been shot directly in the left eye. This incredibly specific, intimate, and gruesome detail suggests a terrifying level of proximity and a deeply personal or incredibly cold-blooded manner of execution, painting a picture of a killer who looked directly at their victim in the final, chaotic moment. Curiously, more recent communications and updates from the authorities have opted for a broader categorization, stating only that she died from a fatal gunshot wound, carefully omitting the specific anatomical location of the trauma. Regardless of the phrasing, the inescapable fact remained that a firearm was introduced into a peaceful environment, utilized to extinguish the life of an unarmed woman of 21 years who had merely been seeking a ride to the ocean. In the present era, a crime scene yielding a body, clothing, and potential projectile fragments would immediately trigger a massive, technologically advanced forensic response heavily reliant on the extraction of microscopic genetic material. Today, investigators assume that a killer inevitably leaves a part of themselves behind, a stray hair, a microscopic flake of skin, or an invisible smear of sweat that can be amplified into a definitive, undeniable biological blueprint. However, the detectives investigating this murder were operating in the spring of 1973, a full decade before the revolutionary advent of deoxyribonucleic acid profiling would fundamentally rewrite the rules of criminal justice. Their forensic toolkit was severely limited, relying on the rudimentary sciences of the time, forcing them to depend heavily on easily identifiable physical objects rather than the invisible biological remnants of a struggle. Crime scene technicians painstakingly combed the area surrounding the church, carefully collecting bullet fragments, attempting to cast degraded footprints, searching for tire tracks along the uneven dirt pathways, and securing the clothing and personal effects belonging to the victim. They knew with absolute certainty that the perpetrator had occupied that exact physical space, that they had breathed the same air and manipulated the environment to conceal the body, yet the scientific limitations of the era rendered the killer essentially invisible. Biological evidence that might have been present on her clothing or the surrounding vegetation was tragically useless, recognized as human material but incapable of pointing a direct, scientific finger at any specific individual in the population. Deprived of the definitive answers that modern science might have provided, the investigative team was forced to lean entirely on traditional, agonizingly slow methods of detective work, initiating a massive campaign of interviews and interrogations. The primary objective was to painstakingly retrace her final steps, working backward from the desolate grounds of the Kahikolu Trinity Church to the sunlit shoulder of the road in Kealakekua where she was last seen alive. They began with her immediate circle, sitting down with the roommates who had spent the previous week holding onto the innocent, tragic assumption that she was safely exploring the remote trails of the northern coast. Once the misunderstanding regarding the Waipio Valley trip was deconstructed, the timeline narrowed significantly, firmly establishing that the abduction and subsequent murder had almost certainly occurred on the very afternoon she vanished. Armed with this timeline, investigators descended upon the local community, canvassing the beaches she frequented, questioning the local residents living in the immediate vicinity of Napoopoo, and attempting to identify any unusual vehicles or individuals seen near the church. The most daunting aspect of this human-centric investigation was the attempt to identify the motorists who regularly traversed that specific coastal route, seeking the one driver who had pulled over and offered the fatal ride. Because hitchhiking was such a pervasive, informal, and undocumented method of transportation, finding the specific vehicle that picked her up was a monumental, almost insurmountable task, akin to searching for a single grain of volcanic sand on a sprawling beach. Despite the immense logistical challenges and the frustrating lack of physical evidence, the relentless pressure applied by the detectives during these exhaustive community interviews did generate a degree of momentum and suspicion. Over the course of the active investigation, as relationships were scrutinized and alibis were vigorously checked and rechecked, authorities did manage to identify several individuals who warranted a much closer, more intense level of official scrutiny. These individuals were officially designated in the files as persons of interest, a careful legal term utilized by law enforcement to describe someone who has drawn the attention of an investigation but against whom there is insufficient evidence to justify an arrest or formal accusation. The existence of these individuals indicates that the police were not entirely blind, that they had successfully followed certain threads of human intelligence that led them towards specific, potentially viable suspects within the local ecosystem. However, the transition from a person of interest to an indicted murder suspect requires a foundation of concrete, undeniable proof, a foundation that simply did not exist in the degraded landscape of this particular case. The individuals who fell under suspicion were interviewed, their movements on the day of the murder were meticulously analyzed, and their connections to the victim were thoroughly explored by seasoned investigators desperate for a breakthrough. Yet, every single promising lead eventually dissolved into ambiguity, stymied by a complete absence of direct witnesses to the abduction or the shooting, and heavily compounded by the failure to locate the firearm used to commit the crime. The most devastating hurdle facing the investigators was the impenetrable wall of silence that surrounded the final moments of the victim, a silence that no amount of interrogation or forensic analysis could successfully break. Without a murder weapon to trace back to an owner, without an eyewitness to place a suspect at the scene, and without a confession to provide a narrative framework, the police were legally paralyzed. They possessed theories. They harbored suspicions regarding certain individuals who had crossed paths with the investigation, but theories and suspicions hold absolutely no weight in a court of law, requiring factual substantiation to proceed. As the weeks slowly transformed into months, the frantic, high-stakes energy that characterized the initial phase of the investigation began to wane, replaced by a heavy, suffocating sense of institutional frustration and mounting despair. The persons of interest, having never been formally charged or publicly named, slowly receded back into the fabric of the community, carrying their secrets, if they held any, entirely beyond the reach of the justice system. The case file, initially overflowing with daily reports, eager witness statements, and hopeful forensic requests, gradually began to thin out, the influx of new information slowing to an agonizing crawl. The young woman who sought out the beauty of the island was slowly relegated to the archives, her tragic fate transitioning into a dormant mystery that echoes eternally through time, demanding an impossible answer. The culmination of a criminal investigation is universally expected to be a courtroom, a formalized arena where evidence is presented, narratives are rigidly contested, and a definitive judgment is ultimately handed down to restore a fractured sense of societal order. However, in the tragic narrative of Gail Hook, this fundamental expectation of justice was never met, leaving behind a profound and agonizing void that has stretched across more than 5 decades. The absolute absence of a trial is perhaps the most devastating aspect of this enduring mystery, representing a complete systemic failure to hold anyone accountable for a brutal act of violence. Because no physical evidence definitively linked any single individual to the crime scene, and because the wall of silence surrounding her final hours remained entirely impenetrable, law enforcement officials were legally paralyzed. They were incapable of securing an arrest warrant, let alone constructing a compelling indictment that could withstand the rigorous scrutiny of a legal proceeding. Consequently, the gavel never fell, a jury was never convened, and the person responsible for extinguishing the life of a vibrant 21-year-old woman was allowed to simply walk away, retreating back into the anonymous fabric of the island community without facing a single consequence for their horrific actions. This lack of judicial resolution creates a unique type of enduring trauma, denying the victim the final dignity of having the truth of her death officially acknowledged, and denying her loved ones the necessary closure to properly navigate their profound grief. The failure to identify and prosecute a suspect inflicted a severe and lasting psychological toll on the residents of the Big Island, fundamentally altering the social dynamics of the tight-knit coastal communities. The culture of absolute trust and mutual reliance that had defined the early 1970s, a culture that actively encouraged practices like hitchhiking, was irrevocably shattered by the terrifying realization that a murderer was moving freely among them. The pristine beaches and winding coastal roads were no longer viewed as idyllic extensions of a peaceful paradise, but rather as potentially dangerous landscapes harboring invisible threats. A heavy, toxic blanket of suspicion descended upon the Kealakekua area, fundamentally changing how neighbors interacted with one another and completely redefining the concept of personal safety. People began to view passing vehicles with deep apprehension, questioning the previously assumed goodwill of strangers and recognizing the profound vulnerability inherent in their isolated existence. The knowledge that the perpetrator had successfully evaded capture, utilizing the very environment they all cherished as a shield for their brutality, bred a pervasive sense of paranoia that slowly eroded the foundational innocence of the era. This communal trauma was a direct consequence of the unresolved nature of the crime, a lingering poison that ensured the victim would not be the only casualty of the violence that occurred near the old church. As the active investigation gradually lost momentum, stymied by a complete lack of actionable leads and the frustrating limitations of era-specific forensic science, the case inevitably entered a devastating new phase. The transition of an active homicide investigation into a cold case is a slow, agonizing process characterized by a steady decrease in dedicated resources and a heartbreaking shift in institutional priorities. The initial influx of detectives, the frantic canvassing of neighborhoods, and the daily media briefings slowly fade away, replaced by a suffocating silence as newer, more immediate tragedies demand the attention of law enforcement. For a cold case, time is not merely a passive element. It is an active, aggressive adversary that constantly works to destroy whatever fragile remnants of truth might still exist. Physical evidence, no matter how carefully stored in climate-controlled evidence lockers, continues to quietly degrade over the decades, its potential utility slowly eroding alongside the technological advancements that might have one day unlocked its secrets. The geographical landscape of the crime scene itself undergoes constant transformation, with tropical vegetation reclaiming paths, modern developments paving over dirt roads, and the physical reality of 1973 disappearing completely beneath the relentless march of progress. The case file transforms from a dynamic, evolving narrative into a static historical document, a tragic archive of a failure to secure justice that gathers dust on a shelf while the outside world effortlessly moves forward. The most profound tragedy associated with the passage of time in a cold case is the inevitable, irreversible loss of human memory, the slow erasure of the witnesses and individuals who formed the connective tissue of the investigation. The young people who populated the beaches of Kealakekua, the drivers who navigated the coastal highways, and the residents who lived in the immediate vicinity of the crime scene eventually aged. Their recollections of that specific spring slowly blurring into a generalized nostalgia for a bygone era. Crucial details that might have seemed insignificant in the immediate aftermath of the murder, a strange vehicle parked near the church, a brief encounter on the shoulder of the road, or a fleeting conversation, are quietly lost to the natural cognitive decline associated with aging. Furthermore, the transient nature of the island population meant that many potential witnesses eventually moved away, scattering across the globe and taking their fragmented pieces of the puzzle with them, completely isolating them from the continuing efforts of local investigators. More devastatingly, as decades turn into half a century, the inevitable reality of human mortality begins to drastically thin the ranks of those connected to the case, silencing potential witnesses and unindicted persons of interest alike. The grim possibility exists that the perpetrator themselves has long since passed away, taking the absolute truth of what happened on that fatal day to their grave, forever placing the final answer beyond the reach of any earthly justice system. In the absence of a courtroom resolution, the administrative fate of the investigation was eventually formalized through its official transfer to the Unsolved Homicides Unit of the Hawaii Police Department. This specialized division serves as the final repository for the most enduring mysteries in the jurisdiction, a solemn archive dedicated to preserving the memory of victims whose cases have defied all conventional attempts at resolution. The transfer to this unit is a dual-edged sword. It represents a heartbreaking acknowledgement that the active pursuit of the killer has effectively ceased, yet it also guarantees that the case will never be completely closed or formally abandoned. The file detailing the life and brutal death of Gail Hook remains permanently open, a standing challenge to the investigative capabilities of future generations and a lingering reminder of a profound systemic failure. Within the confines of this specialized unit, the case is periodically reviewed, subjected to fresh sets of eyes in the desperate hope that a new perspective might illuminate a previously overlooked detail hidden within the voluminous reports. However, these administrative reviews are fundamentally limited by the absolute scarcity of the original evidence, forcing investigators to repeatedly confront the same impenetrable walls that stymied their predecessors in the early 1970s. The Unsolved Homicides Unit is a quiet, sobering environment where justice is perpetually delayed, a bureaucratic purgatory where the memory of the victim is meticulously maintained, but the resolution of their tragedy remains tragically elusive. The frustration experienced by the detectives who originally worked the case was immeasurable, a heavy burden carried by professionals who dedicated their lives to finding answers that simply refused to materialize. They knew that somewhere on the island, or perhaps somewhere on the mainland, an individual was walking free, carrying the weight of a horrific secret without facing any legal repercussions. The persons of interest who had once occupied the immediate focus of the investigation were eventually allowed to resume their normal lives, their names shielded from public scrutiny due to the lack of formal charges. This agonizing reality, that those who might possess critical knowledge regarding the murder were protected by the very legal system designed to uncover the truth, created a profound sense of institutional helplessness. Investigators were forced to acknowledge that without a sudden, unexpected confession or a miraculous scientific breakthrough, their hands were completely tied, rendering them passive observers to an enduring injustice. The inability to present a suspect before a judge, to articulate the specific sequence of events that led to the fatal gunshot, and to secure a conviction, represented a massive failure that haunted the department for generations. It is a chilling reminder that the pursuit of justice is not a guaranteed endeavor, but rather a fragile process entirely dependent on the availability of concrete evidence and the willingness of individuals to speak the truth. The reality of an unsolved murder is a complex, enduring trauma that extends far beyond the immediate violence of the act itself, resonating through decades and permanently altering the historical landscape of a community. The failure to bring the perpetrator of this horrific crime to trial means that the narrative of Gail Hook is forced to remain suspended, lacking the definitive, concluding chapter that a formal legal judgment provides. There are no transcripts detailing the motives of the killer, no testimonies from witnesses pointing an accusatory finger, and no final verdict to restore a sense of balance to the universe. Instead, there is only a vast, terrifying silence, a profound emptiness that forces those who remember the case to grapple with the darkest aspects of human nature without the comforting framework of a judicial resolution. The absence of a trial ensures that the mystery remains a living, breathing entity, a dark shadow that continues to loom over the history of the Big Island, constantly whispering a chilling reminder of the vulnerability of innocence. It is a stark, unforgiving reality that justice is not an inevitable outcome, but rather a fragile, easily thwarted pursuit that can be entirely defeated by the silent, relentless passage of time and the terrifying capability of a killer to simply vanish into the tropical landscape. Anniversaries in the context of a cold case are not occasions for remembrance as much as they are stark, unforgiving markers of a continuing failure. They serve as a heavy, annual reminder of the time that has been stolen and the justice that has been consistently denied. In the year 2013, exactly 4 decades after the shattered peace of that Hawaiian spring, the profound weight of this specific anniversary prompted a deliberate and systematic resurgence of official activity. The Hawaii Police Department, recognizing the immense historical and emotional burden carried by the unsolved murder of Gail Hook, authorized the Unsolved Homicides Unit to completely reopen and meticulously re-examine the entire investigative file. This was not merely a superficial administrative review, but a comprehensive, deeply determined effort to resurrect the narrative from the dusty archives and subject it to the rigorous scrutiny of a new generation of investigators. Detectives who were not even born when the crime was committed were tasked with navigating the fading photographs, the typewritten witness statements, and the incredibly complex web of long-abandoned leads. The fundamental goal was to strip away the accumulated decades of frustration and approach the tragic sequence of events with entirely fresh eyes, desperately hoping that the sheer distance of time might unexpectedly illuminate a crucial detail that had been entirely overlooked by the original investigative team. The physical reality of the case file itself was a testament to the passage of time, with yellowing paper and fragile crime scene photographs that required delicate handling. Transitioning these artifacts into a digital format allowed the modern unit to cross-reference data points with speed. Yet, despite modern software, the core of the investigation remained unchanged, relying on the same frustratingly incomplete collection of human memories and degraded evidence. The detectives assigned to this monumental task were acutely aware of the daunting odds stacked entirely against them, understanding they were essentially chasing a phantom through a landscape fundamentally altered by decades of development. The primary catalyst driving this comprehensive 40-year review was the tantalizing, almost magical promise of modern forensic science, a technological revolution that had successfully breathed life back into countless other dormant investigations across the nation. The investigators in 2013 possessed analytical tools that the original detectives could only have dreamed of, specifically the incredible capability to extract and sequence microscopic biological material through advanced deoxyribonucleic acid profiling. The Unsolved Homicides Unit initiated a painstaking inventory of every single piece of physical evidence that had been preserved from the crime scene near the Kahikolu Trinity Church, evaluating each item for its potential to yield a viable genetic profile. They looked to the clothing she wore, the fragmented personal items recovered from the unforgiving terrain, and the heavily degraded ballistics evidence, desperately searching for an invisible biological signature left behind by the killer during the commission of the violent act. Furthermore, the modern investigators utilized advanced ballistics databases to re-examine the projectile fragments, hoping to identify a microscopic imperfection that might finally link the fatal bullet to a specific firearm or connect the murder to another previously unassociated crime. However, the application of 21st century science to 1970s evidence is frequently a heartbreaking endeavor, a process severely hampered by the devastating environmental factors that plagued the initial crime scene. The agonizing reality was that the week-long exposure to the relentless Hawaiian climate, the torrential rains, and the aggressive biology of the jungle may have entirely eradicated the very genetic material that modern science was now perfectly equipped to analyze. The police have maintained a strict, strategic silence regarding the specific results of these modern forensic evaluations, refusing to publicly disclose whether any viable DNA was successfully extracted or if the new ballistics analysis yielded any actionable intelligence. Beneath the complex layers of forensic analysis and administrative reviews lies a core set of profound, haunting questions that continue to define the enduring mystery of Gail Hook. After more than half a century of relentless inquiry and countless hours of dedicated police work, the fundamental mechanics of her abduction and subsequent murder remain entirely shrouded in an impenetrable darkness. The most agonizing and persistent question revolves around the identity of the individual who offered her that final, fatal ride from the sunlit shoulder of the Kealakekua Highway. Was the perpetrator a calculated, transient predator who opportunistically preyed upon a vulnerable hitchhiker, a random intersection of innocence and pure malice on a coastal road? Or, perhaps even more terrifyingly, was the driver someone she actually recognized, a familiar face from the local community whose completely non-threatening presence successfully disarmed her natural instincts and convinced her to enter the vehicle without a moment of hesitation? The total absence of a clearly defined motive further complicates the narrative, leaving investigators to endlessly speculate on the dark psychological forces that drove an individual to execute a young woman in such a remote and desolate location. Furthermore, the whereabouts of the murder weapon remain completely unknown, a crucial missing link between the victim and the killer. Is the firearm rusting away at the bottom of the deep Pacific Ocean, deliberately discarded to erase proof of guilt, or does it remain hidden in a dusty attic, a silent relic of a decades-old atrocity? The most chilling possibility that investigators must constantly confront is the likelihood that someone, somewhere, is still holding onto a vital piece of information. Whether out of misplaced loyalty, a paralyzing fear of retribution, or a profound sense of crippling guilt, a witness may have deliberately chosen to remain silent. As the calendar advances to the year 2026, the stark, unforgiving reality of the situation remains utterly unchanged, an incredibly bitter pill for the justice system and the surrounding community to swallow. Despite the exhaustive historical reviews, the desperate application of advanced modern technology, and the relentless passage of 53 years, absolutely no one has ever been arrested for the brutal murder. There are currently no official suspects publicly named, no pending indictments awaiting a signature, and no immediate prospect of a dramatic courtroom confrontation to finally settle the scales of justice. The file detailing the tragic end of Gail Hook stubbornly remains an active, open cold case within the jurisdiction of the Hawaii Police Department, a constant, institutional reminder of a profound failure to protect the vulnerable. Authorities continue to periodically issue solemn public pleas, utilizing modern media channels to desperately broadcast the details of the crime in the fading hope that a previously unknown witness might finally step forward into the light. Law enforcement officials consistently emphasize the critical legal reality that there is absolutely no statute of limitations regarding the crime of murder, meaning that the threat of prosecution will endlessly pursue the perpetrator until their final breath. This unwavering commitment to the case is a testament to the dedication of the detectives, but it also highlights the profound burden carried by a police department that is fundamentally unable to close one of its most infamous chapters. The lack of resolution serves as a lingering, toxic shadow over the historical narrative of the Big Island, a dark reminder that the breathtaking beauty of the natural environment is sometimes incapable of masking the profound depths of human depravity. To look back at this specific tragedy after more than 5 long decades is to engage in an exercise of profound sorrow, requiring a deliberate effort to strip away the clinical terminology of cold cases and unsolved homicides to focus entirely on the human element. We must refuse to allow Gail Hook to be defined solely by the horrific violence of her final moments or the enduring frustration of the police department that failed to secure justice on her behalf. Before she was reduced to a haunting headline and a collection of degraded evidence, she was a vibrant, deeply optimistic 21-year-old woman who possessed a profound love for the ocean and a genuine desire to experience the world on her own terms. She crossed an enormous expanse of water seeking a life of peace and natural beauty, only to have her future violently stolen by a coward hiding behind the lush foliage of a tropical landscape. Her story is a devastating testament to the fragility of life and a chilling warning about the unseen dangers that can lurk within the most seemingly tranquil environments. As the years continue to quietly slip away, relentlessly eroding memories and burying physical evidence deeper into the earth, the collective demand for truth must somehow remain steadfast and unwavering. The unresolved murder of Gail Hook is not merely a historical anomaly. It is an open wound in the fabric of the community, a profound and tragic injustice that continues to cry out for a final, definitive answer. Until the darkness is finally pierced by the light of accountability, her spirit remains tethered to that lonely stretch of road, endlessly waiting for an ending she so rightfully and truly deserves. The enduring legacy of a cold case like the brutal and unsolved murder of Gail Hook extends far beyond the physical confines of the police archives and permeates the very psychological foundation of the community that was forced to absorb the shock of such an incomprehensible tragedy. When a life is violently extinguished in a place universally celebrated for its profound tranquility and natural splendor, the resulting dissonance creates a permanent scar on the collective consciousness of the region, fundamentally altering how generations perceive the safety of their own surroundings. The western coast of the Big Island, with its jagged volcanic rocks and endless stretches of vibrant blue ocean, remains undeniably beautiful, yet for those who remember the dark spring of 1973, the landscape is forever haunted by the unseen ghost of a young woman whose journey was so cruelly interrupted. The transition from a trusting, deeply interconnected society where hitchhiking was a celebrated norm to a cautious, defensive culture where strangers are viewed with inherent suspicion was not a gradual evolution but a sudden, violent rupture triggered by the realization that a predator had successfully used their paradise as a hunting ground. This loss of innocence is a secondary tragedy that ripples outward from the epicenter of the crime, affecting thousands of individuals who never even knew the victim, but who nonetheless mourn the destruction of the idyllic era she represented. As we reflect on the decades of silence and the agonizing lack of a judicial resolution, we are forced to confront the deeply uncomfortable reality that the mechanisms of human justice are inherently fragile and entirely capable of failing those who need them the most. The detectives who have rotated through the Unsolved Homicides Unit over the past half-century have carried a unique and heavy burden, acting as the designated custodians of a memory that the rest of the world is entirely too eager to forget as they move forward with their own lives. These investigators operate in a twilight realm of justice, sifting through the degrading remnants of the past, desperately trying to reconstruct a shattered narrative using evidence that has been mercilessly battered by time, weather, and the sheer apathy of the universe. They understand that with each passing year, the statistical probability of identifying the perpetrator and securing a conviction diminishes exponentially, yet they remain steadfast in their commitment. Driven by a profound moral obligation to ensure that the final chapter of this tragic story is not completely surrendered to the void. The profound tragedy of the missing trial, the absent verdict, and the missing confession is that it denies the community the formalized ritual of closure, leaving an open, bleeding wound in the historical record that continues to demand attention and demand answers that may never materialize. We must consider the terrifying possibility that the individual responsible for this horrific act managed to live out the remainder of their natural life entirely unburdened by the consequences of their violence, walking the same beaches and breathing the same air as the people they so deeply betrayed. This chilling thought challenges our fundamental belief in a balanced moral universe, forcing us to grapple with the chaotic, random nature of human cruelty and the unsettling truth that sometimes the darkness simply swallows the light without offering any explanation or any path toward redemption. Yet, even in the face of this overwhelming darkness, the continued act of remembering serves as a powerful form of resistance, a deliberate refusal to allow the identity of the victim to be permanently erased by the passage of time or overshadowed by the anonymity of their killer. To speak her name, to recount the details of her life, and to acknowledge the profound injustice of her death is to actively push back against the silence, demanding that the world recognize the value of the vibrant 21-year-old woman who simply wanted to find peace by the ocean. Her love for the natural world, her open and trusting nature, and her adventurous spirit must not be entirely eclipsed by the brutal circumstances of her demise. Rather, they must be preserved and celebrated as a testament to the beautiful, complex humanity that was so senselessly stolen. The pursuit of truth in a case this old requires an almost monumental level of patience and an unwavering belief that eventually, some hidden fragment of information will finally break loose from the grip of the past and illuminate the shadows that have concealed the killer for over 50 years. We must hold onto the fragile hope that an unburdened conscience, a deathbed confession, or a miraculous technological breakthrough will one day provide the key to unlocking this enduring mystery, finally bringing a measure of peace to the restless spirit that haunts the desolate grounds near the old stone church. Until that day arrives, the story remains a solemn warning about the fragility of life and the deceptive nature of paradise, a dark narrative thread woven permanently into the vibrant tapestry of the Hawaiian Islands, constantly reminding us to cherish the light while remaining fiercely vigilant against the encroaching shadows. The silence of the jungle that surrounded her in her final moments continues to echo through the decades, a deafening absence of truth that challenges our resolve and demands that we never abandon the search for the answers that have eluded us for so long. Every time a new person learns of her fate, every time the details of the investigation are meticulously reviewed, and every time her memory is honored, we strike a tiny but significant blow against the obscurity that threatens to consume her entirely, ensuring that she is never truly forgotten. The legacy of this unsolved murder is a complex tapestry of sorrow, frustration, and enduring hope. A narrative that forces us to look deeply into the most uncomfortable corners of the human experience, while simultaneously recognizing the incredible resilience of those who refuse to let the darkness win. We are bound by a shared humanity to carry the weight of this unresolved trauma, acknowledging that an injustice permitted to stand without challenge diminishes the moral fabric of our entire society, leaving us all slightly more vulnerable and slightly less secure in our own existence. The passage of over 5 decades has undoubtedly transformed the physical landscape of the crime scene, washing away the footprints and burying the microscopic evidence. But it has not diminished the absolute moral imperative to seek accountability for the violent termination of a promising young life. The Hawaii Police Department continues to maintain an open posture, a beacon of institutional memory that signals to the public and to the killer alike that the passage of time does not equal absolution, and that the long arc of justice, however delayed, may still find its mark. As we conclude this extensive exploration into one of the most haunting cold cases in the history of the Pacific, we must consciously choose to elevate the humanity of the victim above the macabre details of the crime. Focusing our collective energy on honoring the vibrant spirit that was lost rather than dwelling solely on the unknown monster who took her away. She was a daughter, a friend, a seeker of beauty, and a young woman full of boundless potential, and it is through the deliberate, continuous act of remembering these fundamental truths that we provide her with the only form of justice that currently remains within our grasp. The story of her life and death is a permanent fixture in the tragic annals of true crime, a profound mystery that will continue to captivate, frustrate, and sadden generations of investigators and citizens alike, forever linking her name to the breathtaking, unforgiving landscape that ultimately claimed her. The relentless march of time will undoubtedly continue to present formidable challenges to the pursuit of a definitive resolution, but the enduring power of human memory and the unwavering commitment of those who refuse to forget offer a glimmer of hope that the final truth may yet be revealed. Finally, allowing the echoes of 1973 to slowly fade into a long-awaited, peaceful silence. But even if the silence never comes, even if the case files eventually turn to dust and the specific names of the investigators fade from the institutional memory of the local precincts, the philosophical implications of this unpunished violence will continue to resonate through the study of criminal justice and human behavior. The failure to solve this crime forces us to examine the terrifying concept of the perfect murder, not as a work of dark genius, but as a tragic alignment of geographical isolation, delayed discovery, and the primitive state of forensic science that existed during that specific era. It highlights the uncomfortable reality that sometimes the environment itself acts as an unwitting accomplice, shielding the perpetrator from the immediate consequences of their actions and providing a vast, impenetrable hiding place for the darkest of secrets. The lush vegetation, the relentless tropical rain, and the porous volcanic rock are not malicious entities, yet in this specific context, they functioned as an incredibly effective barrier between the investigators and the truth they so desperately sought to uncover. This dynamic forces us to view the natural beauty of the island through a fundamentally altered lens, recognizing that the same elements that draw people to the region in search of healing and tranquility can also serve to mask the most brutal and unforgiving aspects of human nature. This duality is central to the enduring fascination with the case, as it perfectly encapsulates the classic true crime juxtaposition of a seemingly flawless paradise violently disrupted by an act of inexplicable savagery, leaving a permanent stain on an otherwise pristine canvas. We are left to ponder the daily existence of the killer, imagining how they navigated the decades following the crime, whether they were constantly looking over their shoulder in fear of an unexpected knock on the door, or whether they possessed a sociopathic detachment that allowed them to completely compartmentalize the horror they had inflicted upon an innocent stranger. Did they ever return to the overgrown grounds near the church to survey the scene of their crime, drawn back by some dark, psychological compulsion, or did they flee the island entirely, carrying their terrible secret to a new, unsuspecting community far across the ocean? The absolute lack of answers to these agonizing questions is the defining characteristic of a cold case, a frustrating void that invites endless speculation but ultimately offers no tangible comfort or definitive resolution to those who continue to seek the truth. We must recognize that the true victims of this unresolved mystery are not just the young woman who lost her life, but also the friends who spent a week believing she was safe, the family who never saw her return from her island adventure, and the community that was forced to permanently alter its way of life in response to the unseen threat. The ripples of this trauma extend far and wide, touching countless lives and shaping the historical narrative of the region in ways that are both profound and deeply saddening, ensuring that the legacy of that fateful spring day will never be fully erased. Ultimately, the story we have explored is a testament to the enduring human need for narrative closure, a desperate, driving desire to organize the chaos of violence into a coherent sequence of events that can be understood, processed, and ultimately overcome. When that closure is denied, as it has been in this tragic instance, we are forced to find meaning in the ongoing struggle itself, honoring the victim by refusing to let her case be entirely consumed by the shadows, and maintaining a vigilant, watchful presence in the faint hope that one day, the universe will finally yield the answers we seek. Until then, the desolate stretch of earth near the Kahikolu Trinity Church remains a quiet, solemn monument to a life cut tragically short, a place where the vibrant energy of youth collided with an unimaginable darkness, leaving behind a profound mystery that continues to echo through the decades. Demanding justice, demanding remembrance, and demanding that we never entirely give up the fight for the absolute and final truth regarding the untimely and heartbreaking demise of Gail Hook. As we continue to reflect on the profound tragedy of the unsolved murder of Gail Hook, it becomes increasingly necessary to examine the broader sociological implications of a cold case that has remained open for over 50 years on the Big Island of Hawaii. The fact that the perpetrator has successfully evaded justice since 1973 casts a long, terrifying shadow over the community, fundamentally altering the way residents perceive their seemingly idyllic surroundings. The western coast, with its breathtaking volcanic landscapes and crystal-clear waters, is undeniably beautiful, but for those who remember the dark reality of her demise, the scenery is forever tainted by the haunting knowledge that a brutal killer once used this paradise as a hunting ground. This profound loss of innocence completely shattered the trusting, open culture that defined the early 1970s, replacing the widespread acceptance of hitchhiking with a pervasive culture of suspicion and fear. The sudden realization that danger could lurk behind a friendly smile or an offered ride forced the community to permanently raise its defenses, drastically changing the social fabric of the island. Young people seeking adventure and a deeper connection with nature were no longer viewed as carefree spirits, but rather as vulnerable targets navigating a potentially hostile environment. The detectives tasked with maintaining the integrity of the Unsolved Homicides Unit carry the immense emotional weight of this enduring mystery, acting as the solemn guardians of a narrative that refuses to reach a definitive conclusion. These dedicated investigators operate in a frustrating twilight zone of law enforcement, forced to sift through decades-old reports, fading photographs, and severely degraded physical evidence that has been mercilessly battered by the relentless tropical climate. They are acutely aware that with each passing year, the statistical likelihood of identifying the unknown suspect and securing a legal conviction diminishes at an agonizingly rapid pace. Despite the overwhelming odds stacked against them, they remain firmly committed to their pursuit of the truth, driven by a deeply ingrained moral obligation to ensure that the memory of the 21-year-old victim is never entirely abandoned to the archives. The absence of a trial, the lack of a formal verdict, and the missing confession collectively deny the community the essential psychological ritual of closure, leaving an open, bleeding wound in the historical record of the police department. This agonizing lack of resolution forces us to confront the chilling possibility that the individual responsible for this horrific act of violence managed to live out the entirety of their natural life without ever facing the consequences of their brutal actions. They may have continued to walk the very same beaches, breathe the same salty air, and interact with the same local residents they so deeply betrayed, entirely unburdened by the immense weight of the tragedy they inflicted upon an innocent stranger. This terrifying prospect challenges our fundamental belief in a just and balanced universe, forcing us to grapple with the chaotic, entirely random nature of human cruelty and the unsettling reality that sometimes the darkest impulses of humanity can successfully evade the light of justice indefinitely. Yet, even in the face of this overwhelming darkness, the deliberate act of remembering serves as a powerful form of resistance against the slow, steady erasure of time. To speak her name, to recount the details of her life before that fatal spring day, and to constantly acknowledge the profound injustice of her untimely death is to actively push back against the suffocating silence of the unknown killer. We must consciously choose to elevate the vibrant, adventurous spirit of the young woman from Seattle who simply wanted to find peace by the ocean, refusing to allow her identity to be permanently eclipsed by the brutal, calculated circumstances of her demise. Her deep connection to the natural world, her open, trusting personality, and her unwavering belief in the fundamental goodness of others must be preserved and celebrated as a powerful testament to the beautiful, complex humanity that was so senselessly stolen. The pursuit of truth in a cold case of this magnitude requires an almost monumental level of patience and an unshakable, enduring belief that eventually, some hidden fragment of vital information will finally break loose from the suffocating grip of the past. We must constantly hold onto the fragile, flickering hope that a deeply unburdened conscience, a sudden deathbed confession, or a miraculous breakthrough in modern forensic technology will one day provide the necessary key to unlocking this enduring mystery. Until that momentous day arrives, the tragic story remains a solemn, unyielding warning about the inherent fragility of human life and the deceptive, often dangerous nature of seemingly perfect environments. The narrative thread of this unsolved murder is now permanently woven into the vibrant historical tapestry of the Hawaiian Islands, constantly reminding us to cherish the light while remaining fiercely vigilant against the encroaching, unpredictable shadows. The silence of the dense tropical vegetation that surrounded her in her final moments continues to echo loudly through the decades, a deafening absence of objective truth that constantly challenges our collective resolve and demands that we never abandon the long, difficult search for the answers that have eluded investigators for over half a century. Every single time a new person learns of her tragic fate, every time the fading details of the initial investigation are meticulously reviewed by modern detectives, and every time her memory is respectfully honored, we strike a tiny but significant blow against the obscurity that constantly threatens to consume her entire legacy. The legacy of this specific unsolved murder is a remarkably complex tapestry of immense sorrow, institutional frustration, and incredibly enduring hope, a narrative that forcefully compels us to look deeply into the most uncomfortable, darkest corners of the human experience. We are bound by a shared sense of humanity to carry the heavy weight of this unresolved trauma, actively acknowledging that an injustice permitted to stand without challenge inherently diminishes the moral fabric of our entire society, leaving us all feeling slightly more vulnerable and slightly less secure in our own daily existence. The passage of over 5 decades has undoubtedly transformed the physical, geographical landscape of the crime scene near the old church, washing away the original footprints and burying the microscopic evidence deeper into the volcanic earth. But it has absolutely not diminished the absolute moral imperative to seek accountability. The Hawaii Police Department continues to maintain an actively open posture regarding the file, serving as a vital beacon of institutional memory that clearly signals to the general public and to the elusive killer alike that the mere passage of time does not equal absolution. The long, bending arc of justice, however delayed or obstructed it may currently be, may still unexpectedly find its ultimate mark if the right witness finally decides to break their decades-long silence. As we contemplate the vast expanse of time between the initial discovery of the victim and the current reality of the year 2026, we must consciously choose to focus our collective energy on honoring the vibrant, living spirit that was lost rather than dwelling solely on the unknown, faceless monster who took her away from the world so abruptly. She was a deeply loved daughter, a cherished friend, an enthusiastic seeker of natural beauty, and a young, optimistic woman full of boundless, untapped potential, and it is through the deliberate, continuous act of remembering these fundamental, undeniably human truths that we provide her with the only form of justice that currently remains firmly within our grasp. The profound story of her life and her subsequent tragic death is now a permanent, unmovable fixture in the dark annals of true crime history, an enduring mystery that will inevitably continue to captivate, deeply frustrate, and profoundly sadden entirely new generations of dedicated investigators and concerned citizens alike. The relentless, unforgiving march of time will undoubtedly continue to present formidable, nearly insurmountable challenges to the ongoing pursuit of a definitive, legal resolution, but the enduring power of human memory and the unwavering, fierce commitment of those who stubbornly refuse to forget offer a small glimmer of hope. We must continue to hope that the final, objective truth may yet be fully revealed, finally allowing the tragic, lingering echoes of 1973 to slowly fade into a long-awaited, peaceful silence that the victim so rightfully deserves. This enduring mystery demands our constant attention, asking us to never look away from the painful reality of her absence. We must always remember the young woman who loved the ocean, who trusted the world, and who was betrayed by a darkness she never saw coming. The search for the elusive truth will continue indefinitely, driven by an unyielding desire to balance the scales of justice. Her memory remains a powerful force, inspiring a relentless quest for the ultimate answer until the day her murderer is finally identified and held accountable for stealing a truly innocent and completely perfect human life. The unending passage of time is the most relentless and unforgiving adversary in any cold case investigation, acting as a silent, invisible force that steadily erodes the fragile foundation of justice and permanently alters the complex landscape of human memory. When a violent criminal act remains completely unsolved for over 5 long decades, the narrative slowly transforms from an active, frantic pursuit of a dangerous, unknown perpetrator into a deeply philosophical and agonizing reflection on the fundamental nature of objective truth and the devastating, terrifying fragility of human life. For the tight-knit residents of the Big Island, the enduring dark mystery of this 1973 murder continuously serves as a constant, heavy emotional reminder of the profound inherent vulnerability buried deep within their seemingly perfect and eternally peaceful tropical paradise. The stark, incredibly jarring contrast between the breathtaking natural beauty of the vibrant Hawaiian coastline and the horrific, senseless violence that abruptly ended the promising life of a young, adventurous woman creates a deeply unsettling cognitive dissonance for anyone who meticulously studies the grim details of the official police file. This beautiful, visually stunning environment, characterized by its jagged, porous volcanic rocks and pristine, expansive blue waters, was universally supposed to be an absolute safe sanctuary for a younger generation desperately seeking spiritual refuge from the chaotic cynicisms of the modern, industrialized mainland world. Instead, it tragically and unexpectedly became the silent, completely complicit backdrop to a brutal, cold-blooded execution, successfully hiding the darkest, most terrifying secrets of humanity beneath its lush, overgrown tropical canopy. The physical environment itself seemingly absorbed the immense trauma, keeping the true identity of the ruthless killer permanently concealed from public view and entirely frustrating the dedicated, exhaustive efforts of local law enforcement officials. Every single passing day that concludes without a definitive legal resolution adds another incredibly agonizing layer of profound, immense sadness to an already devastating, heartbreaking story of a completely stolen, unlived future. The seasoned investigators who periodically review the slowly degrading physical contents of the old police file are constantly forced to confront the incredibly frustrating, severe limitations of their chosen, demanding profession. They currently possess the immense professional dedication and the modern advanced technological tools theoretically necessary to successfully solve highly complex historical mysteries, yet they remain entirely paralyzed and legally bound by the absolute devastating absence of usable physical evidence and the impenetrable, enduring silence of any potential eyewitnesses. This ongoing, seemingly permanent institutional paralysis creates a lingering, heavy sense of systemic failure that deeply affects the surrounding local coastal community and permanently alters the fundamental social dynamics of the entire Western region. The vibrant, optimistic 21-year-old woman who traveled across the vast, expansive ocean seeking a simple, authentic existence was tragically and violently denied the precious opportunity to fully realize her boundless human potential and experience the long, happy future she so rightfully deserved. Her deep, profound spiritual connection to the natural physical world and her beautifully open, trusting personality were violently weaponized against her by an unknown, calculating predator who opportunistically exploited the established, relaxed cultural norms of that specific historical era. The widespread universal cultural acceptance of roadside hitchhiking, once a beautiful functional symbol of communal trust and mutual civic reliance, was forever irrevocably destroyed by this single calculated act of unimaginable extreme cruelty. The local island society was abruptly and painfully forced to rapidly abandon its innocent, carefree worldview and aggressively adopt a much more cautious, highly defensive psychological posture toward unknown strangers and transient temporary visitors. The enduring, terrifying silence successfully surrounding the true exact identity of the violent perpetrator is perhaps the most deeply unsettling aspect of this decades-old, complex criminal investigation. The chilling, awful realization that a brutal murderer successfully navigated the chaotic immediate aftermath of the violent crime and seamlessly, completely reintegrated into normal functioning society is a dark thought that continually haunts the collective waking consciousness of the general public. It forces us to openly acknowledge and confront the terrifying innate capability of certain dangerous individuals to entirely compartmentalize extreme physical violence and successfully present a completely normal, totally harmless facade to the unsuspecting, vulnerable world. The unknown killer could have easily been the seemingly friendly neighbor, the casual passing acquaintance, or the completely anonymous transient stranger passing through the quiet town, entirely hidden in plain sight and perfectly protected by the trusting anonymity of the era. This profound, absolute lack of accountability completely disrupts the delicate, vital moral equilibrium that a functioning modern justice system is carefully designed to diligently maintain and fiercely protect. When a brutal execution-style murder goes entirely unpunished for over half a century, it implicitly suggests to the worst elements of society that the most horrific, devastating acts of physical violence can be successfully executed without any earthly consequence or structural legal retribution. This highly dangerous, extremely toxic precedent fundamentally undermines the core foundational principles of societal civic order, leaving ordinary innocent citizens feeling profoundly exposed and inherently vulnerable to the random, chaotic, dangerous whims of purely malicious, unseen actors. The Unsolved Homicides Unit stands alone as a crucial, vital bulwark against this creeping societal despair, absolutely refusing to ever allow the tragic narrative to be permanently officially closed without a proper, thorough fight. The agonizing, slow transition from a highly publicized, urgent, active police inquiry to a dormant, dusty, historical cold case is a heartbreaking bureaucratic process defined by slowly diminishing public hope and constantly shifting institutional funding priorities. The original passionate detectives who tirelessly aggressively canvassed the coastal neighborhoods and passionately interrogated every single identified person of interest eventually gracefully retired, taking their intimate, invaluable encyclopedic knowledge of the nuanced local social dynamics with them into their quiet private lives. The massive complicated case was quietly administratively passed down to a completely new younger generation of law enforcement professionals who were unfortunately heavily forced to rely entirely on fading two-dimensional photographs and yellowing typewritten witness transcripts to fully understand the complex, nuanced reality of a social world that existed long before they were even born. The fragile physical evidence, meticulously collected from the isolated, overgrown church grounds near the historic structure, has steadily naturally degraded, continually frustrating the noble, highly advanced efforts of modern specialized forensic scientists. Despite the incredible revolutionary global advancements in complex deoxyribonucleic acid profiling and digital computerized ballistics analysis, the microscopic vital biological material absolutely necessary to definitively identify the killer may have been entirely destroyed by the harsh natural elements during that crucial initial first week of outdoor exposure. The unforgiving, intense Hawaiian sun and the torrential, aggressive tropical rains ultimately acted as the ultimate accidental accomplices, methodically completely washing away the fragile microscopic scientific clues and severely crippling the entire trajectory of the investigation before the local police even knew that a horrific crime had actively occurred. The profound, deeply moving human tragedy entirely at the center of this enduring dark mystery must constantly remain the absolute primary focal point of any subsequent retrospective analysis or modern active investigative effort. We must deliberately fiercely resist the strong analytical temptation to improperly reduce the innocent victim to a mere police statistic or a morbid intellectual puzzle waiting to be cleverly solved by amateur online true crime detectives. She was a deeply universally loved, highly complex human individual with unique personal aspirations, profound internal fears, and a genuine, unwavering, beautiful love for the rhythmic, soothing, continuous motion of the ocean sea. Honoring her precious memory effectively requires a steadfast, absolute commitment to preserving the complete, absolute truth of her vibrant humanity against the relentless, erasing, overwhelming tide of historical obscurity and general public apathy. The continued, persistent, official refusal of the local regional authorities to completely abandon the long search for legal justice provides a small but incredibly significant vital glimmer of enduring hope for the surviving extended family and aging friends. The periodic, highly publicized, intensive reviews of the massive cold case file clearly, definitively demonstrate a powerful institutional moral commitment to holding the unknown violent perpetrator legally accountable regardless of exactly how much time has successfully elapsed since the fatal, devastating physical encounter. This unwavering professional dedication serves as a solemn, incredibly powerful promise to the deceased victim that her human life held immense inherent intrinsic value and that her violent, senseless death will never ever be fully accepted as a permanent, unchangeable, and completely tragic footnote of the local historical record. The devastating total lack of a formal public trial entirely denies the affected grieving community the deeply necessary, profound psychological resolution that only a structured, formal legal proceeding can adequately, properly provide. A physical courtroom naturally serves as a critical, essential public arena where the chaotic, terrifying, scattered elements of a violent crime are meticulously, systematically organized into a coherent, understandable, comprehensible narrative of established, objective truth. Without this formalized, strict process, the overall story remains permanently heavily fragmented, leaving entirely too much open room for endless, agonizing, painful speculation and the continuous, rapid proliferation of deeply unsettling false rumors. The absolute total absence of a definitive legal verdict ensures that the incredibly heavy, exhausting burden of the vast, terrifying unknown will continue to relentlessly plague the innocent descendants of that specific historical era. The haunting, distinct, horrible possibility that the individual ultimately responsible for this heinous, brutal crime may have already naturally passed away entirely escapes the long-reaching, heavy arm of human, earthly legal justice. If the unknown killer successfully took their dark, terrible, violent secret directly to the grave, the ultimate objective truth regarding the exact sequence of events of that fateful day will remain forever permanently locked in the absolute, impenetrable dark silence of human mortality. This extremely frustrating, deeply agonizing potential scenario represents the ultimate devastating failure of the entire systemic investigative process, completely denying the innocent victim the basic fundamental dignity of having their unimaginable suffering officially publicly acknowledged and leaving the dedicated police force to permanently grapple with a profound, unresolvable, heavy sense of deeply personal professional defeat. The profound, enduring mystery surrounding the exact physical location of the original lethal murder weapon adds another incredibly complex layer of continuous extreme frustration to an already deeply convoluted and agonizingly slow investigation. Finding the specific firearm would immediately provide a crucial, tangible, vital link between the isolated, desolate, overgrown crime scene and the elusive, unknown perpetrator, potentially completely cracking the entire weak foundation of the case, wide open for the first time in over 50 years. However, the vast, incredibly deep, dark waters of the immense Pacific Ocean and the incredibly dense, unforgiving, hard volcanic terrain of the surrounding Big Island offer virtually infinite perfect hiding places for a small metallic piece of highly lethal criminal evidence. The weapon stubbornly, quietly remains a silent, undiscovered, lost artifact of sudden, explosive violence, perfectly hidden by the natural, beautiful landscape, and successfully keeping its dark, terrifying secret from the prying eyes of modern investigators. The tragic, unfinished story of this specific, unsolved coastal murder continually serves as a powerful, somber, dark warning about the inherent, extreme, dangerous folly of projecting absolute purity and total innocence onto any physical, geographical location, regardless of its unparalleled, breathtaking visual beauty. The breathtaking, natural, stunning beauty of the entire volcanic Hawaiian archipelago can easily, effortlessly create a dangerous, completely false, pervasive sense of human invulnerability, blinding local, lifelong residents and transient short-term visitors alike to the universal, terrifying, latent capacity for sudden, explosive human depravity. Pure, unfiltered evil does not ever naturally recognize established geographical or cultural boundaries, and the darkest, most terrifying, violent impulses of the fractured human mind can spontaneously physically manifest in even the most visually stunning and seemingly entirely tranquil, safe environments on the entire planet. This profoundly, deeply tragic, stark reality forces a complete, total, necessary reevaluation of exactly how we understand absolute human safety and deeply, aggressively challenges our fundamental baseline assumptions regarding the protective, inherent nature of an island paradise. Ultimately, the enduring, deeply painful legacy of this heartbreaking historical cold case is a powerful, highly emotional testament to the absolute, critical, desperate necessity of relentless, unwavering public communal remembrance in the immediate, direct face of total historical oblivion. As long as her beautiful, innocent name is continuously spoken aloud by the living, and as long as the deeply tragic, completely unfair, brutal circumstances of her passing are carefully studied and profoundly lamented, the darkness will never ever achieve a total and completely absolute final victory over the light. We must continuously, enthusiastically, and bravely search for the highly elusive, scattered answers, not simply to harshly punish the ultimately guilty, unknown party, but to completely and totally lovingly restore the shattered dignity of the beautiful, deeply innocent young woman whose only mistake was innocently trusting a complete stranger on a sunny, beautiful, warm Hawaiian coastal road. The passage of well over 5 long decades has undoubtedly completely transformed the physical geographical landscape of the immediate original crime scene near the old historic church, entirely washing away the original fragile footprints and burying the microscopic vital evidence much deeper into the dark, damp volcanic earth, but it has absolutely not diminished the absolute moral, ethical imperative to fiercely seek final legal accountability. The Hawaii Police Department remarkably and admirably continues to actively maintain an open investigative alert posture regarding the massive file, serving as a vital essential beacon of strong institutional memory that clearly loudly signals to the general worried public and to the highly elusive agent killer alike that the mere simple passage of time does absolutely not equal total moral absolution. The long-bending historical arc of human justice, however delayed or completely obstructed it may currently appear to be in this specific instance, may still unexpectedly and suddenly find its ultimate intended mark if the right silent burdened witness finally decides to bravely break their decades long suffocating oppressive silence. As we continuously deeply contemplate the vast, terrifying, expanding expanse of time stretching between the initial shocking, gruesome discovery of the victim and the current reality of the present modern day, we must consciously, deliberately choose to focus our collective emotional energy on honoring the vibrant living spirit that was tragically abruptly lost rather than dwelling solely on the unknown, faceless, violent monster who took her away from the beautiful world so abruptly. She was a deeply loved, cherished, precious daughter, a wonderful, loyal friend, an enthusiastic, passionate seeker of natural beauty, and a young, highly optimistic woman full of boundless, untapped, incredible potential. And it is entirely through the deliberate, continuous, active act of remembering these fundamental, undeniably human, beautiful truths that we provide her with the only exact form of historical justice that currently remains firmly within our immediate collective grasp. The profound, unfinished story of her unique, brief life and her subsequent tragic, violent death is now a permanent, unmovable dark fixture in the dark annals of true crime history, an enduring, terrifying mystery that will inevitably continue to entirely captivate, deeply frustrate, and profoundly sadden entirely new younger generations of dedicated professional investigators and highly concerned, empathetic citizens alike. The relentless, unforgiving, rapid march of time will undoubtedly continue to inevitably present formidable, nearly insurmountable modern logistical challenges to the ongoing difficult pursuit of a definitive legal resolution, but the incredibly enduring strong power of human memory and the unwavering, fierce, intense commitment of those who stubbornly, absolutely refuse to ever forget offer a small, beautiful, fragile glimmer of hope. We must deliberately, firmly continue to fiercely hope that the final objective truth may yet be fully and completely clearly revealed finally, allowing the tragic, lingering, emotional, painful echoes of 1973 to slowly, naturally fade into a long-awaited, incredibly peaceful total silence that the victim so rightfully and truly deserves. This deeply enduring complex mystery demands our constant, unwavering, focused attention, constantly asking us to never ever look away from the highly painful, uncomfortable reality of her sudden, permanent, absolute absence. We must always vividly remember the wonderful young woman who absolutely passionately loved the immense blue ocean, who innocently, beautifully trusted the wider surrounding world, and who was ultimately tragically betrayed by a terrible, violent darkness she never ever saw coming. The difficult, exhausting search for the highly elusive historical truth will inevitably tirelessly continue indefinitely, constantly driven by an unyielding, passionate, burning desire to finally, permanently balance the deeply unequal, broken scales of justice. Her enduring, powerful memory forever remains a highly potent emotional force, continuously inspiring a completely relentless, exhaustive quest for the ultimate, absolute, factual answer, until the incredible, triumphant day her unknown murderer is finally publicly identified and held totally legally, unconditionally accountable for violently and senselessly stealing a truly innocent and completely perfect human life.